I'm having a very interesting guest here today. I'm with Patrick Ward from Rootstrap. And basically, what he's doing there is he's heading up the marketing team as the director of marketing. And basically, Rootstrap is supporting companies to build out apps or the web development, staff augmentation, and UI and UX design. So basically they're supporting on all the angles that are important for growth at this day and age. So I'm very pleased to have Patrick on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Lucas. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very good. So maybe give us your own summary about Rootstrap, right? I did maybe a little job of it. So maybe tell us in your own words, what is Rootstrap all about?
Yeah, so Rootstrap is a custom software development agency, but obviously that describes a lot of companies. So what makes us different? I think the key for Rootstrap is that we help companies scale. We focus on three main industries, being healthcare, e-commerce, and e-learning, and by creating technology that is flexible. So one of the things that a lot of people don't realize with technology is the experience that a user might have with it can shift depending on how many users are involved with a particular product, how many are using it at a given time. And that's where Rootstrap can really help people, where you're wanting to have a seamless experience for your technology or your product in the hands of users, whether there's 1 million users using it or whether there's a couple of hundred in the off-peak times. That's where we come in.
Gotcha. So that everybody who's listening can get a good understanding about Rootstrap, maybe you could tell us something that characterizes the company, but maybe how many clients you're working with, or I don't know, people coming to the website, or any prizes or rewards you've won, something that characterizes Rootstrap a little bit.
Yeah, so I think a real testament to our success has been our recent recognition on the Inc. 5000 back to back. We've also been named as the number 35th best B2B service provider by Clutch.co, which is an agency that rates B2B service providers. But I think really, if we're boiling down to one single nugget or one single client that characterizes Rootstrap's efforts, it is Masterclass. So as many people might be familiar with Masterclass, many people might have picked up a subscription to Masterclass during the pandemic. We started with Masterclass as one single developer on a single, tiny little project. And that has grown now to over 20 team members working alongside the Masterclass developers based in San Francisco. Our developers are based in Latin America, specifically Uruguay and Argentina. And I think what is really interesting about this engagement is not just that we help Masterclass scale. We've helped them double their revenue over the last couple of years. But not only that, we've been able to embed ourselves. We're able to work as a true strategic partner, helping them not only achieve their goals from a technology side, but also achieve their goals of growth from a business side. And that's, easily the one client project that, if you ask any developer on Rootstrap's team, who do they want to work for? They want to be a part of that Masterclass effort.
I can see that. It's also, I think, very fulfilling, right? For working such a company that has such an awesome cost. So very, very cool. I would be curious. So you mentioned Masterclass, but what would be, let's say the typical average type of client Rootstrap would be working with?
Yeah, it does generally appear in these two segments of what I would call a growth stage startup. So that's Masterclass, or the mid-market. So the mid-market being companies over 50 million. They tend to be ones that are looking for digital transformation. Perhaps they have archaic technologies. And it's kind of a big reason why we focus in on those three areas that I mentioned before of healthcare, education, and e-commerce, specifically for retailers, because they're three areas that need to scale, and the way that they're going to scale is leaning into digital transformation, but they don't necessarily have the team members to do it. Or maybe their technical team knows older programming languages and need to be updated with the latest trends. That's really where we come in to provide our technical expertise, as well as guidance on best practices, how to build a product not only that is functional right now, but that can scale in the future as you add a version 2, a version 3, new features, new products. That's as much a part of the software development process as building a great app right in this moment in time.
Got you. Very interesting. You mentioned actually those different segments, right? So if somebody's listening in and considers themselves to be one of the sides of the segments, like what would be a typical, a ticket where you guys would be starting to help businesses if they would wanted to get sort of the type of service that Masterclass is enjoying? Like where would a ticket typically start?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because obviously with software development, you can start anywhere in the couple of thousands. If you're using an independent developer, you can go up to $1 million projects, and that's what we've got with Masterclass. They've spent several $1 million with us over the course of their engagement with us. But the thing I focus here on is an MVP. So most businesses, when they're going to start with some type of software development engagement, they're going to come to us for an MVP. And typically that starts at about $100,000 to $150,000. Obviously, as you add in more complexity, more integrations, it can go up from there. Hence why we always advocate for a time and materials cost so that you can get the most accurate price. A lot of software companies try and bid on a fixed price. The problem is they make too many assumptions and your software product is not able to be flexible as you're building it because, hey, maybe you think you know what you're building for your end user, but suddenly they give you some feedback and, oh, you need to completely pivot and need to change your approach. So that's really important. But typically I tell people, look, unless you got 100 to 150K, probably better to go the independent developer route. And certainly I make recommendations to people, look, there are great places to find them like Upwork. But if you're any less than 100K, we probably shouldn't be talking.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And this probably gives a lot of direction for the people who are listening in. What I would be curious, right? So you at the head of marketing, you probably know in and out of the journey, right? That visitors or people take in order to get started with Rootstrap. Like what would be a typical path or the typical client acquisition channels that you would be typically seeing?
Yeah, there's 3 main channels that actually make up the bulk. I actually just did this, figured out that over 50% come from 3 channels specifically. One being Google AdWords, so paid search around different terms in the buyer's journey. Organic traffic is obviously very big, particularly for technical terms. So I think in 2 main buckets. One is location-based, so people searching for developers in a particular location, particularly in the United States, where as much as our developers are based in Uruguay and Argentina, we also have team members based in New York and Los Angeles. Additionally, you also think industry. So a lot of people in the education space, for example, might find us by searching education app developers or best education app developers. Additionally, like I mentioned before, Clutch being an agency that provides B2B service provider rankings, we get a lot of leads from that. So when people are searching for particular technologies, they'll often find themselves on a site like Clutch. There are various others like Good Firms, UpCity. There are many, many others that people encounter. Generally, we have a good presence on those sites, and therefore people will be able to look at reviews of past client work. They'll be able to see the verticals and the industries that we focus on. They'll be able to see the types of technologies that we've done, as well as testimonials. And from there, we'll usually get people who come to our website. From coming to our website, it's a pretty straightforward process to filling out our contact form. At that point, they usually have to have some level of discussion with our sales team. The fact is, as I mentioned before, if you're spending at minimum $100,000, $150,000, it's going to be a very consultative sale. So people need to speak with our sales team, speak about their specific problem, the specific issue they're having, and what are the potential technology solutions.
Makes a lot of sense, and thanks for sharing that journey. Since you brought up the website there, I would be curious, right? What would you consider at the moment the strength of the website? Is it the ability to, get that conversion when somebody's on the page, the ability to convert? Is it the quality of the leads, the conversations? You mentioned that is really important, the consultative approach. Or is it the experience that you can provide? Where do you see a strength of the website?
I think the current strength is that it's very simple to get in touch with us. I think that's probably the easiest thing. We've had a traditional reputation in the past where we've focused on earlier stage startups. That's not true anymore. And like any company that moves up the value chain, it brings its own difficulties. We have to continually monitor and change the messaging of our site in order to reflect our current customer persona rather than our previous customer persona. But certainly the current website, it's a very simple website. It's very prominent with our contact page, both with contact call to actions on the main homepage, as well as other areas such as what I would call the location pages. So our Los Angeles app development page, our New York app development page, those are very prominent in terms of providing pretty easy to fill out forms. In the past, I would say we didn't do a great job of collecting information. Nowadays, we've increased the amount of fields that we've put into that form to provide just our sales team with a little bit more information of like, what is the client persona? Are they a product owner? Are they a technical buyer? Are they a CEO? Maybe they're a marketing person, so they're not as technical. That all helps our sales team just when they're framing that initial consultation, because as you can imagine, particularly with the world of technology, if you're speaking to a technical buyer, you want to get really into the weeds pretty quick because they don't want to waste their time. They want to figure out, do you have the technical chops to do what they're asking you to do? If it's more on the CEO, CMO side of things, that tends to be a little bit more of the relationship rapport building type of sale. So there you're more focused on what was the business impact, hence why we would talk, in a masterclass using that as an example. If we're talking to a technical buyer, we're talking about, what did we do specifically to make the technology scalable? What languages did we use? Which team members were associated? If we were talking to a non-technical buyer, we're more talking about the revenue impact of our work. And those little framing things are important for us to gather early in that buying process in order to make sure that our sales team understands how to pitch that conversation.
Makes sense. If I would ask on the flip side, right? So you were showing what is one of the sort of strength of the website. On the flip side, where do you see room for improvement?
I think a big side of this is got to come from content. So one of the things that is a big focus for my marketing team specifically in 2021 is how can we provide more content that allows customers or potential customers to self-select where they should be. Right at the moment, the contact form does I guess you would call it an aggregation job, right? It brings everyone in through the same process and rather leads it to the sales team to figure out which type of offering they should be suggesting to a client. I think there's a lot more room for improvement on the marketing side of things to identify that earlier and to figure out, hey, maybe we should be feeding them this client case study early so they feel more confident in going to a Rootstrap process rather than someone else's process. And this is obviously in the world of B2B, we understand that we're going to be compared to other vendors, right? That's always going to be the case. But if we can frame that conversation earlier so that people think Rootstrap's the right choice rather than someone else, it just allows you to not get into that perennial game where people decide, is this company kind of similar to this company, kind of similar to this company, right? Because a lot of technologies companies sound the same, and we really want to avoid that. We really want to show how we can be a strategic partner for a company rather than just a vendor, because otherwise you get into a cost price war and no one wins from that.
Makes a lot of sense. Did you already try something to sort of, you mentioned that, custom case studies, for example, based on where they are in the journey? Like, did you already, bring the marketing team? What do you have in store for that? What do you try to do?
Yeah, we've certainly done a little bit with case studies. I think there's a lot more room for improvement just in terms of the volume of case studies. I'm certainly more excited for some personalized newsletters. We've actually been experimenting with, I've got to give these guys a shout out. They're called Futureloop. Really interesting newsletter service that analyzes based with machine learning different topics or different customer segments and the content that you could feed different customer segments. We're in early stages with them. I think it was a couple of weeks ago we started, but early signs look promising. I think that's a key component that a lot of people think about producing content. Just, I need to keep producing. I need to just keep getting stuff in front of my audience. That's not necessarily the case. What you need to do is get the right content in front of people at the right time. Very similar to what you guys do at Pathmonk, just identifying, hey, if it's early in the buyer journey, maybe you need to be offering up potential solutions, helping frame how someone's thinking about a problem. Once you're thinking an evaluation of alternatives, that's a completely different set of content. That's more you're trying to convince why your company, or in this case, why Rootstrap specifically, is best for their solution, because they've already done that work. And I think that's a big part of providing content, not just to draw people into the website, but when they return to the website. We've done some good job, I think, of tracking when people come back to the website. What I want to see us do in 2021 is providing new and more relevant content to them when they return inevitably, because again, as I mentioned, this is a high ticket item. It does take a lot of money to spend with us, and it's not a decision that is made quickly. You know, at the minimum, you're talking 3 months as a sales cycle. Maximum, I've seen some deals that have come through 9, 12 months. And that's, it's nothing to do with, anything wrong with what Rootstrap has done. It's just merely a case of sometimes clients don't get budget at certain times. Sometimes there's a specific time of the year that they get budget allocated for technology initiatives. That's all really important to take into account. And in order to do that, we need to be respectful of the fact of, hey, you might be in this stage as a prospect. What stage are you at? How can we identify that? And how can we provide the best possible content that helps you do your job better?
Makes a lot of sense. Super interesting. Since we always love to give out, shout outs to tools, you brought up Futureloop there. How, if some marketeers are interested in that, how can they find that? Do you know?
Yeah, I believe if you just type in futureloop.com, you'll find them. Really cool service. You can sign up for their own newsletter, which essentially demonstrates the tool for you in real time, as well as it's now an offering that companies can purchase. So super cool tool.
Very cool. That's exactly what this podcast is about, like those little nuggets that, interesting marketeers find and share with each other. Very cool. Thanks for that. So I would love to switch gears and talk about you personally as a leader in marketing in the company. What type of content do you consume, and how do you educate yourself, right, to keep on progressing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think a big part of what I've turned to is books. Funnily enough, I know it sounds really old school. I obviously have my usual publications that I keep abreast of. The things like Social Media Today and those other, I guess you'll call industry publications. The funny thing is about books, and I find that if someone has bothered to take the time to write a book, that therefore they've just put a little bit more rigor. And maybe I'm biased here. I actually put out a book myself early in February of this year. Mm-hmm. And just going through that process myself, I'm making sure that this is really tightly written, really valuable to the reader. And I can see myself doing that more with when I was writing the book than when I, for example, write an article. It's not that I'm not caring, it's just that, you've got a tighter deadline. With an article, you just try and pump something out reasonably quickly. So I found that really interesting. Another thing I think that a lot of marketers fail to do, funnily enough, is forms of experimentation. So as much as I continue to always enjoy what I do with Rootstrap, I actually own and operate a number of other websites on the side. And what I do with those is I test things out and I see, does this work here? Or does something else work here? And by doing that and constantly experimenting with different forms of content, different tactics, you're able to figure out what works. And a lot of times marketers fall into this trap of where they read so much, or they consume so many different articles, so many different pieces of content, all telling them different things, and they get paralyzed to a point that they don't try something out. I think a lot of people like to pretend that marketing has a science behind it, and it does, but at the same time, you're still dealing with humans, and humans are very fickle creatures. And given that, you need to constantly be aware of like, hey, this content campaign may have worked 3 months ago. That might not be the case anymore. People might be sick and tired of it. You think like, I think of the classic example here is when the pandemic started. So for a few companies that started the pandemic with some really sincere messaging of how they cared and what they were doing to help people, that blew up, really positive press. Then suddenly you saw the consumer market switch against companies who were doing that. They were saying like, oh, you know, you're just saying you care about us, but you don't really care about us. Like that happens a lot. And if a marketer isn't always willing to experiment, because we get into this like headspace of like, oh, well, I think that might work, or I think that might not work, rather than just look, test it, get it in front of an audience, get it in front of some people, and just see what they respond to. If they respond poorly, hey, that's not terrible. I literally had a cold email campaign that we ran 2 weeks ago that did very poorly. And I was as happy with that as I was for the previous 2 months where we had email campaigns that were performing exponentially well. Because in each of those instances, we have opportunities for learning and we have opportunities to do better.
Very good. Yeah, just for everybody who was listening in, obviously Patrick was way too humble to plug his book by himself. So so you can check it out. It's the Amazon best-selling Money Matters series that he was involved in, as far as I'm informed. So yeah, head over and check that out. So what I would be curious, as we're slowly finishing the interview, I would be curious if you would be open to run with us through the rapid fire questions at the end of the interview.
Let's do it.
Since you brought out the books, what's the last book you read?
Oh, the last book I read, Scale Up. Really interesting book. If you're at all involved with a startup, or even if it's a fast-growing startup, or even if you've ever thought about starting a startup, Scale Up is phenomenal. The reason I say that is so many people, and I've seen my fair share of entrepreneurs throughout the years, they get so obsessed with their idea or obsessed with the problem they're solving or something like that, that passion can blind them to the mechanics. And that's what Scale Up really understands, is like, hey, you might be super passionate about this, but you're one human. You cannot work 30 hours a day. It's not possible. So how do you systematically implement processes to allow you to scale up? Because so often what happens is companies reach a cap and then they decline because they didn't figure out what were the processes they needed to take themselves to the next level. So highly recommend Scale Up.
Very good. And the next question would be, if there would be no boundaries in technology, what would be the one thing you would wanted to have fixed for your company today?
There's that's a great question. I think, honestly, it is our communication. Our communication is pretty good, but one of the things that I miss, and I think the pandemic has really highlighted this, is the fact that our team is distributed. And our team's been distributed since the very beginning. But even with virtual meetings like this, even with virtual conferences, it's still not quite the same. And if technology was able to get to a point that was able to replicate in-person communication in a really powerful and human way, I think that would be incredible. Because funnily enough, I've hired 2 team members during this pandemic. I have never met them in real life. I only know them in this Zoom format. And it's kind of crazy to me to think about that. And I feel I know them because obviously we speak every day, but at the same time, it's just not quite the same as in person. If technology could do that, we'd be in a game-changing world.
Yep. Very last question. If we would be zooming back 1 year and 2 months from now, when you got started working with Rootstrap, what would be the one advice that you would give yourself?
Don't be so hard on yourself. I came from a competitor of Rootstrap. That's actually how I joined. One of my former co-workers started with them, and then I got recruited as a result of his involvement. And having all of that infrastructure in place in the previous company, I kind of was hard on myself thinking, oh, like, there's all of this marketing that's not right. We need to fix it. We need to improve it. And I think as a result, even right now, I have this sort of residual feeling of, I wish we were a little further along. And I think what that mindset unfortunately hasn't taken into account is you've accomplished quite a lot this year. I think one of my mentors said this very well of, you didn't come in on the ground level with Rootstrap. You didn't come into a basis of nothing. You came with a negative basis. It is as hard to undo bad practices as it is to implement good practices. So while it might not feel like you got to the level of success or the level of implementation of processes and strategies and tactics that you wanted, you actually did accomplish a lot because you had to undo bad things as well as implement good practices. So yeah, if I'd sum that up, it's like, just give yourself a break, Patrick.
Very good. And I want to close it up with that one. Patrick, I really appreciate that you took the part of being with Pathmonk Presents today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lucas.